Palaces of Amber, Polish Mythology and Folklore. This audiobook chapter will recount 3 folktales from Poland about the old personification or god of the Baltic Sea. As long as anyone could remember, far away in the unknowably vast sea, there sat a glittering emerald of an island, a brilliant garden of flowers and forests. On this island stood a castle of gold with crystal windows, which were studded with ruby and sapphire trim. Here ruled a beautiful Germanic princess named Lydia, with many servants, and her guest rooms always filled with handsome knights and lords. At all times she delighted in hosting guests and celebrating endlessly. Beautiful Lydia indulged in the reverence of her dozens of suitors and lovers, but as soon as any of them asked for her hand in marriage, she sent them from the island and replaced them, her cold heart hardening, as this carried on for many years. One day, walking the gardens, she overheard guests gossiping about how vain she was. Offended, she gathered all of the guests to the garden in her center courtyard. Standing before everyone, Lydia got their attention, took a bracelet decorated with her coat of arms off of her wrist, and held it up. "People, whoever can recover my bracelet by the end of the week will become my husband." And she dropped the bracelet over the opening of a deep water well, sending it clattering down, and it splashed to the bottom. Men peered into the well. It was as dark as night, deeper than a tower is tall, and they looked around to one another, reading fellow hesitant faces, and after some muttering, they fell silent. Then one prince turned to the docks to leave, and he was followed by another and another. So soon many of the princes had decided to abandon the island and the queen, rather than risk their lives descending the well. 1 week passed. Many ships arrived, hauling not only suitors but commoners and ladies and all sorts who wished to see who the queen would marry. Every hall and every room of the giant castle was vibrant with the partying and extravagance of the reveling queen who adored this attention. Queen Lydia sat upon her throne and smirked, confident that no suitor would dare descend the wall, and that she would remain her own sovereign, while silencing any critics with the simple truth that she was open to marriage, but that no man found the courage to take her hand. She sipped, she laughed, she chatted with her handmaidens, and the night drug on. Just around midnight, a poor fisherman approached her, and he extended his hand, and she gasped. Tangled in his net was her bracelet, he explained. "Since no hero dared descend, good queen, I cast my net down the well to retrieve this. Please, may I have your hand in marriage?" Queen Lydia cackled. "Ha! You, a commoner, an old man? I laugh. Knights, come to me, throw this old coot out." And many of her suitors surrounded the old fisherman and drug him from her chambers. After this, she gathered the partygoers to her balcony. Addressing them with a smirk, Queen Lydia announced, "That was an unfortunate fluke, but no worry, my brave men, you have another chance." She tied a stone to her bracelet. At this, she threw her bracelet with all her might, sending it flying off her balcony, splashing into the sea very far away, sinking into the dark water. "Recover my bracelet by the end of the week, dear suitors, and I will wed you." The men murmured, some nodded, and the crowd dispersed. The party was over. Another week elapsed, and Lydia began her next party. A great feast was prepared, and nearly 1,000 people came to the island to see who would take the hand of the beautiful queen. She partied, laid with suitors, and laughed with her maidens, brimming with confidence. This time she was sure she had done it, but to be safe, she dispatched a few guards to the shore to ensure that no unwelcome fishermen could find their way to the castle. So the party proceeded, and very near midnight, unnoticed by the partygoers, a wind crept up off the sea, shaking the windows, followed by a sea mist which became rain, and soon enough a downpour. As Lydia smirked and sipped her drink, the midnight moon crept into her view through a window above her throne. Looking up, she admired its pearly shine, But her guests fell silent as the chamber doors burst open with a mighty bang, jerking her head back down. Every fire in her chambers wavered, leaving a party of newcomers silhouetted by the moonlight. All of the partiers muttered in shock. Queen Lydia gasped. He must have been a king. He was unnervingly tall, draped in robes of fine green silk, all embroidered in pearls, a cape shimmering with all the gemstones of the world draped over his mighty shoulders. His twisted beard harbored shells and oddities, and atop his head sat a magnificent crown of amber and gold, sparkling under the moonlight. He walked proudly and mightily, his stride longer than any man before seen, and behind him followed a dozen women, nearly as tall as himself, draped in white, shimmering dresses, studded with pearls, their skin nearly as pale, their hair as dark as the night, their eyes shimmering in a color indescribable. As they strode, the mighty winds ravaged the chamber, disheaving all of the partygoers and flustering Queen Lydia. Lightning ripped the sky, thunder shook the castle, and the doors slammed shut. The king walked to Lydia's throne and raised his hand. In his open palm, to Lydia's horror, sat the bracelet encrusted with her coat of arms. He spoke.
"Here is your bracelet. I pulled it from the sea. Keep your oath, and take me as your spouse. I have brought your bridesmaids."
He turned his hand and slid the bracelet into Lydia's palm. His skin was colder than ice and damp as soil. Lydia jerked away with a shriek, trembling. "Keep away from me, you monster! You aberration! Leave my castle! Don't ever come back!" Lydia leapt from her throne, sending it tumbling, tearing away to escape her chamber. But as fast as the wind, the maidens surrounded her and draped her in their veils, tangling her up. The entire room erupted in terror. Knights and princes scrambled over one another to reach the back doors and escape the chamber, all in vain. The winds raging outside were like locks on the doors. They could not budge. The king of the sea reached to his belt and retrieved a goat horn encrusted in pearls. He raised it to his mouth and made it roar. Lightning crashed into castle towers. Thunder shook the stones of the floor. Winds arose which stripped the mightiest garden trees of their branches as if trees were ferns. Mighty waves stood tall over the castle, and they crashed down, swallowed the trees, and drowned the castle and every living soul on the island. With a terrible crack, the castle sunk. Where the emerald gardens once grew, now the sea came to rest. Where there had been screams, the ocean fell under silence. By morning, a fisherman arrived to where he expected to find the island of Queen Lydia, but there was no trace. Only from the depths of the sea can sailors sometimes hear the moaning of the queen. For whoever breaks an oath, woe to them, woe for their life, and woe to their evil soul. The god of the Baltic Sea held several names, simply Bałtycki, the Amber King, Morskie, and Gosk or Gusk in Kashubia and Pomerania. He diminished under the partitions, as much of the Polish coastline came under Germanization. Because of the severance from the Baltic Sea, stories like the following were still told featuring the king, but they relocated him inland. Long ago, the Lord of the Sea had a beautiful daughter. Her eyes shone like deep blue pools. Her hair sparkled like golden amber. One day she asked her father if she could travel up the fields and mountains to the distant south. Though he was worried, she was a strong woman, so he allowed it, on the condition that she return home quickly. When she was traveling, she found her way to the Tatra mountains and met a Hungarian prince. The two quickly fell in love. Then the Hungarian made his way back with the princess to her father and asked for his permission to take her hand in marriage. But the king was offended and refused the proposal, insisting that his daughter had to marry someone from the coastline. So when the king was called to war, not knowing how long he'd be gone to the battle, he decided to lock his daughter away in a monastery in his domain to ensure that the Hungarian wouldn't try to take his daughter in his absence. He warned her upon his departure that, if she was to wed the Hungarian when he was gone, she would no longer be his daughter. So the Lord of the Sea went away to fight in the north. He was gone for years. During that time his daughter became dreadfully bored in the castle. She sighed and wept and longed for excitement. During this time she received many gifts from her suitor from Hungary. He sent her packages of beautiful, colorful beads, of pricey ribbons, and of the finest glittering jewels. He sent her fortune-tellers from his land who told her they were destined to be together, that she would be a great, beautiful, and celebrated lady, that she would have silver palaces and golden chambers. They charmed the longing, sad girl, and she promised to escape from the monastery and take the Hungarian as her husband. So in the evening, the young prince came to the monastery dressed as a monk, and he asked for entrance to do churchly duties. The nuns let him in. Inside, the fortune-tellers used herbs and potions to make all the dogs fall asleep. With the dogs subdued and the nuns distracted, the prince, disguised as the monk, fled with the princess. The prince and the princess fled to the border of Hungary, and there he asked her to use her powers to build them a palace. And she built them a palace constructed all of coral, shiny with gold, glittering with pearls, radiant with gemstones, a shimmering jewel from the bottom of the sea. Here in her palace of coral in the mountains, the princess danced all day in the flowery meadows of Hungary. She caressed her many children, and in the evening the witches, fortune-tellers, the fairy servants of the Hungarian king, rocked her and sang to her so she would have nice, beautiful dreams. There was no hail, there was never a flood, there were no diseases among their cattle. The prince and the princess would have 7 beautiful children, and after a long time, when the king of the sea had not yet returned, the people spread rumors that he was killed by Tatars. Believing the rumors, the daughter took on black mourning clothes. She returned to the sea, and she gathered her father's belongings from the Amber Palace and brought it back to her own. But one day, King Morskie returned shortly thereafter, and he asked about his daughter and what had happened to his goods, and the castle hands showed him the way to the Coral Palace. When the daughter learned that her father survived, she dressed herself in jewels and went to greet him, eager to share her radiance and the splendor of her life. The old man crossed himself, spat, and stomped his foot. He cursed, and the Coral Palace crumbled into dust, and he called out,
"God grant that your foreigner husband, your foreigner property, and the foreigner children turn to stone."
And when the princess led all of her children out of the crumbled castle and fell at his feet weeping, he became even more angry. He exclaimed,
"You dissolve in your tears, and let your cursed children melt in them. They will drown, because you are not the daughter of the sea, and they are not the grandchildren of the sea."
And the father's curse was immediately fulfilled. The fields, meadows, and forests of the estate, the flocks, the cattle, and everything turned instantly to stone. The royalty shrieked. The prince disguised himself as a monk and started to run away. But as he ran, he turned into a stone, which is still today called the monk. The princess cried and called to the fairies, but the handmaidens of the prince had abandoned her. They tried to grab the children and carry them away, but as each of them tried, they turned to stone. And stones bloomed like flowers, imprisoning the children in the earth. The children began to cry. Their mother wept. All the tears gathered, and the children began to drown. And the children drowned. They turned into ponds, and within each of these 7 ponds, the soul of the crying child remained and can still be heard. The princess cried and cried and cried until she melted into her tears. She was nothing except her tears, and all that remained of her was the dark black lake, Morskie oko, its waters black like her dress. The people say that in Morskie oko, in the 7 ponds which surround it, all her children connected to her in death, you can hear them crying in the night, their souls all mourning, begging for help. But if anyone hears the cries of the princess and takes pity, the tears will fall down from the mountain and coat them. Our final tale is one which has been muddled by history. It seems that once this tale was told by the Poles who lived in Pomerania, but that after the Germanization of Pomerania, this folktale faded from their cultural vocabulary. But this tale was incredibly similar to one told by Lithuanians, and the Lithuanian story survived. So today, the tale is often told using names inherited from the Lithuanian variant. This telling of the story will not be the Lithuanian one, but will convey the elements which seem to be preserved only in Polish tellings. In the depths of the Baltic Sea, in the ancient times, there was a palace, its walls made of pure amber, the threshold made of gold, the roof made of fish scales, the windows made of diamonds. Once in this castle lived the king of the sea and his princess daughter. The king was seldom home, instead ushering rulership over the sea, tending to his horses and cattle. So often the princess dwelled in the amber palace alone, and in one day succumbing to boredom, she sent a call asking the other women of the sea for advice. Her many sisters and cousins convened and discussed what she would do with her future, and one day they reported gossip of trouble brewing on the shoreline. In these times, the king of the sea and the princess maintained that only the fish may eat the fish, that no terrestrial life may take their domain. But word came that a greedy fisherman from the Pomeranian shore was taking many netfuls of fish, was overstepping his place in nature, and the princess was displeased. So she spoke with her sisters and cousins, and they devised of a scheme. They would come to this young fisherman and pretend to be infatuated with him. All of the women of the sea would seduce him and lead him to the bottom and cause him to drown. The princess agreed on this scheme, and they went to the surface to confront the fisherman. But when the fisherman saw the princess of the sea, and when the princess saw the fisherman, they happened to mutually fall in love. And when the princess surfaced and confronted him, their talk led to proposal. And she asked in return that he halted his fishing. She would come to the surface and live with him in his castle, and this deal was brokered. So it came to pass that during the days, the princess would live at the bottom of the sea in the palace of her father, but at night she would surface, lay with the prince, and live with him on the surface. But this affair did not go unnoticed by her father. One night, after meeting with her lover, she was returning to her palace at the bottom of the sea, and when she returned, she discovered it was empty. And as soon as she noticed this, the amber palace collapsed. All of her sisters and cousins were trapped inside. With a shock, she realized she had been discovered. She fled from the palace and began rushing to the surface to save and warn her prince, but she was too late. She surfaced to find that he had been turned to a stone on the shore. She collapsed at the bottom of the man-made statue, and she wept great tears. Her father surfaced behind her, and he now chained her to the sea. And from this time, none of the daughters of the sea would ever return to the surface places again. If any of the other daughters wished to court a man from the surface, they would have to lead him to the waters, and always he would drown. The princess of the sea wept and wept and wept, and her tears fell into the ocean, solidifying into shimmering amber. And we say that when you poke through the sands of the shore and find bits of amber washed from the ocean, that these are the tears wept by the princess of the Baltic Sea. From here, the king of the Baltic Sea continues to appear in many folktales, but unlike these, most following folktales restrict him and his daughters to their watery domain. This collection of Polish folktales was selected from an ongoing developing project. I'm working on compiling a free-to-download and expansive ebook of Polish folktales translated into English. From the time of this video's publication, I hope that the ebook will be ready to be published within a month or two. If you're Polish or are otherwise familiar with Polish folktales and you would like to ensure the inclusion of your favorite, feel free to leave a comment. Thank you for listening. I hope this was enjoyable and interesting, and I hope that everyone is having a good spring.